The quiet neighborhood that hides untold stories always gives the impression that nothing ever happens there. On the surface, it looks like the kind of place where everyone waves at each other when they walk by, where the lawns are perfectly trimmed and the mailboxes are lined up like little soldiers guarding the secrets of the street. From the outside, it's the kind of neighborhood people dream about moving into, a place where the loudest sound you hear on a Sunday morning is the distant bark of a dog or the occasional hum of a lawnmower. People see it and think, safe, quiet, predictable. They don't see what's hidden just behind the front doors, the fences, or the curtains. They don't see the stories that don't make it to the neighborhood newsletter, the ones that don't get shared at the HOA meetings. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's name, but not everyone's history. The elderly couple in the corner house might seem like they spend their days tending roses and sipping tea on the porch, but maybe they once lived in a city where danger was constant and survival meant making choices that nobody here could imagine. The young family across the street seems like picture-perfect suburban bliss, but maybe they have secrets they don't talk about because some things are too heavy, even for the most polite conversations over the fence. On paper, this neighborhood is calm, safe, and ordinary, and that makes it perfect for hiding in plain sight. People who don't live there often assume quiet streets equal harmlessness. They think that if you're walking down the sidewalks, waving at neighbors and keeping up your yard, you're just a face in the crowd, someone who can be ignored or underestimated. And that's exactly the trap. Quiet doesn't mean empty. Calm doesn't mean weak. Behind the closed doors, behind the muted mailboxes and carefully parked cars, the residents have learned lessons, earned scars, and carry histories that aren't obvious to the casual observer. It's the kind of place where a visitor might look around and see smiles, picket fences, and freshly painted porches. But if they stop to notice, there's always a story hidden in the eyes of someone standing behind a window, watching quietly. Even the architecture of the neighborhood adds to the illusion. The houses look familiar, safe, the kind of homes that appear in real estate brochures with captions like peaceful retreat or family-friendly. But the streets twist in ways that make them seem longer than they are, and the shadows from trees fall differently at night than you expect. There are alleys and corners that never appear on the official map, spaces where you can walk and feel entirely alone even though the street is lined with houses. And in those hidden spaces, untold stories unfold. The quiet neighborhood may seem like it's just another backdrop for ordinary lives, but it's actually a stage where ordinary and extraordinary collide without warning. Even the people who live there sometimes forget how potent that quiet can be. They go about their routines, mowing lawns, taking morning walks, chatting at the mailbox, and they forget that history travels silently. The neighborhood itself seems to hold its breath, preserving stories for the ones who know where to look, who are ready to read between the lines. To an outsider, the street is a blank canvas, unremarkable and safe. To those who belong, it's layered with experience, a place where each house has seen its share of unexpected events, triumphs, and betrayals. There is a rhythm to it, a slow pulse beneath the surface, and only those attuned to it notice when the quiet shifts. It's this duality that makes a quiet neighborhood both comforting and dangerous. Comforting because the surface shows safety, order, and predictability, and dangerous because the surface is exactly what lulls the unprepared into a false sense of security. Outsiders assume the rules of the street are simple. Be polite, don't cause trouble, respect the quiet. But they don't understand that the residents have their own set of rules, ones shaped by experience, intuition, and an understanding that appearances can be deceiving. What seems like a peaceful Sunday might actually be a day when everyone inside the houses is alert, watching for things the outside world doesn't even imagine. And so, the quiet neighborhood that hides untold stories continues to do what it has always done. It waits, it watches, and it protects its own. There is a rhythm to the calm, a tension that outsiders can't see, and a power in knowing that beneath the perfect lawns and familiar mailboxes, ordinary people carry extraordinary histories. Even the most unassuming faces might belong to those who know how to handle danger, how to turn tables, how to defend themselves and their streets without anyone ever noticing. It's a neighborhood that rewards observation and punishes assumptions, and for anyone stepping into it without respect for what lies beneath, the consequences are often unexpected and swift. The wrong girl. Everyone underestimated had a way of blending in that made people completely misjudge her. On first glance, she looked ordinary, maybe even a little quiet, the kind of girl who didn't draw attention unless she wanted to. People walked past her on the street and thought they saw someone harmless, someone who could be pushed around, ignored, or taken lightly. They didn't notice the sharpness in her eyes, the way she studied people without them ever realizing it, or the way her silence carried a weight that most couldn't handle. It wasn't arrogance, it wasn't bravado, it was awareness. She knew the streets she walked every day, she knew the people around her, and she knew exactly how to survive in a place where appearances were everything and reality was often hidden beneath the surface. People underestimated her for a simple reason. She didn't fit their expectations. They expected rebellion to come in loud, messy packages, with shouting, fighting, and obvious defiance. But she was quiet, observant, and calculated. She could smile while sizing someone up, nod while mentally noting every weakness, and laugh while mentally planning what to do if they ever crossed a line. They thought her softness was vulnerability, but it was armor. Her laughter wasn't a signal of innocence. It was a tool to make people comfortable, to lull them into underestimating her. They assumed that she didn't have the strength to fight back because she didn't make a show of it. They assumed that because she walked calmly, dressed simply, and kept her opinions to herself, she was someone who could be ignored. Her reputation, or the lack of it, worked in her favor. Outsiders who thought they could test the boundaries of the neighborhood or push people around didn't realize that her quiet demeanor masked a mind that was always analyzing, calculating, and anticipating every move. She knew who to trust, who to avoid, and who could be a threat before they even realized they were one. And when someone did push too far, she had a way of turning the situation around without raising alarms, without drawing attention, without letting anyone see the storm before it hit. To them, she was harmless. To her, everyone's assumptions were tools she could use. She grew up in that neighborhood, learned its hidden rhythms, and developed instincts sharper than most people noticed. Every conversation, every glance, every passing interaction was a lesson. She understood who had history, who had pride, and who carried secrets, and she could read people in ways that outsiders couldn't even imagine. She learned early that being underestimated was a weapon, that being the wrong girl meant that people made mistakes when they misjudged her. She carried herself in a way that didn't demand respect, but commanded it silently, invisibly, and effectively. People who thought they could intimidate her often discovered too late that she had already anticipated their moves, already planned her counter. There was a quiet power in her presence, one that didn't scream for attention but forced people to notice in subtle ways. She had a way of standing in a room, of walking down a street, that made people pause even when they didn't know why. Outsiders assumed her calm meant weakness, but her calm was deliberate. She could read tension, predict danger, and react in ways that were precise and decisive. People learned quickly that their assumptions about her were wrong, but by the time they realized it, it was usually too late. They thought they could cross her, but crossing her was like underestimating a storm. They never saw it coming until it was already underway. Even her friends, those who had known her for years, knew she carried a fire that wasn't always visible. They knew she could handle herself in situations that would terrify most people, and that she could think 3 steps ahead in moments of chaos. Outsiders assumed her quietness was compliance, that she would avoid conflict or give in to pressure. They didn't know that every move she made, every word she chose, and every reaction she held back was part of a strategy built from years of understanding human behavior and neighborhood dynamics. They didn't know that wrong was exactly what she used against them, that being underestimated was an advantage she never wasted. She had learned early that power didn't always come from yelling or fighting. Sometimes it came from watching, waiting, and letting others reveal themselves. People made mistakes when they assumed they could control her or manipulate her, and she never let those mistakes go unnoticed. To outsiders, she might have seemed ordinary, even forgettable, but in reality, she was a force that thrived on the very assumptions people made about her. They thought they were in charge, they thought they understood her, and that misconception became the weapon she wielded better than anyone else could. The wrong choices made by those who crossed her began the moment they assumed they were in control. It started small, almost imperceptibly, the kind of decisions that seemed harmless at first, the kind that anyone could justify in their own mind. Maybe they laughed at her, thinking she wouldn't respond. Maybe they spread rumors, thinking she would ignore it. Maybe they tried to intimidate her, assuming she wouldn't push back. Every choice they made was based on the illusion that she was weak, that she was someone who could be tested without consequence. And every one of those choices, no matter how insignificant it seemed at the time, set the stage for a reckoning they didn't even see coming. They didn't consider the neighborhood, either, the subtle rules and unspoken codes that had been written long before they arrived. They assumed the street was just a quiet backdrop, a place that existed to be used or manipulated. They didn't notice the eyes behind the curtains, the ears on porches, or the quiet understanding that ran through the community. Every misstep, every poor decision, was magnified by the context they ignored. They thought they were operating in a vacuum, that their actions had no consequences beyond the immediate moment, but they were wrong. In this neighborhood, every choice created ripples, and they were about to learn that the ripples could turn into waves capable of toppling the unprepared. They also underestimated her patience. They assumed that reactions were immediate, that any confrontation would play out like the movies or the stories they told each other late at night. But she didn't operate like that. She understood that timing was everything, that some choices were meant to be allowed, some provocations meant to be noted, and some insults meant to be stored away for the right moment. Every wrong choice they made was recorded silently, memorized carefully, and filed in her mind like evidence. And when the moment finally came, when the consequences started to unfold, they discovered that their arrogance had been their undoing. The first mistake was always thinking it was personal. They believed they were just asserting dominance, just testing limits, just having a little fun at her expense. They didn't understand that in this neighborhood, nothing is just fun and nothing is just a test. The streets and houses are full of history, full of people who know how to read intentions and predict outcomes. They misread her because they had never met anyone who could turn calm observation into strategy. They misread her because they thought boldness required noise, because they assumed strength always made itself visible. And so, every wrong choice they made, from the smallest insult to the most reckless act, added to a growing imbalance that they didn't even recognize. They also ignored the power of consequences that weren't immediate. They thought that as long as nothing happened that day, as long as she didn't react, everything was fine. But in this neighborhood, consequences are like shadows, sometimes long, sometimes hidden, sometimes coming from directions you never expected. The wrong choices stacked quietly, invisibly, like a wall being built brick by brick, until it was solid enough to stop them cold. They didn't realize that what they saw as minor actions were actually triggers, markers, warnings that they were stepping into territory they didn't understand. And because they didn't notice the patterns, they continued, one wrong choice after another, thinking they were safe, thinking they were clever, thinking they had the upper hand. Their confidence also blinded them. Every wrong choice reinforced their belief that she wouldn't, or couldn't, respond. Every miscalculation convinced them that they were smarter, faster, stronger, and that they had mastered the situation. They didn't account for her ability to remain calm under pressure, for her knowledge of who could be trusted, for her skill in turning misjudgments into opportunities. And as each choice compounded, they dug themselves deeper, unaware that they were building a trap of their own making. By the time they realized anything was wrong, the neighborhood itself seemed to conspire against them. They began to understand, too late, that in underestimating her, they had underestimated the environment that shaped her, the streets that had taught her vigilance, the people who had always watched and known. And so, each decision, each misstep, Each wrong choice became a lesson in how arrogance, ignorance, and assumptions could create a chain reaction with consequences far beyond what they imagined. Every action was a mistake, every choice a miscalculation, and each one added to a story that would teach them, in ways they never anticipated, that in the wrong neighborhood, against the wrong girl, the wrong choices are never without consequence. How appearances can be deceiving is something this neighborhood, and this story, teaches better than any warning sign or neighborhood watch could. From the outside, things always look a certain way. The streets are neat, the lawns are manicured, the houses have fresh coats of paint, and the cars gleam in the driveway, as if someone polished them every morning. Walk down the sidewalks, and you see smiling faces, people waving politely, children riding bikes, and the occasional dog barking at a passing stranger. It all seems harmless, even predictable. It's the kind of neighborhood that encourages people to make assumptions, the kind of place where outsiders see calm and conclude safety. They see ordinary and assume ordinary is all there is. But appearances, in this neighborhood, are the first thing that lies to you. Behind every door, behind every curtained window, behind every polite wave, there is complexity, history, and untold stories. The quiet smiles mask vigilance. The perfect lawns hide fences and locks that have been tested more times than most people would guess. The seemingly ordinary people are often anything but ordinary. They carry experiences, instincts, and knowledge that outsiders can't see. And because they are underestimated, the quiet power of the people who live here is often invisible until it is too late for those who misjudge them. Even the girl at the center of this story thrives on the way appearances mislead people. She knows that others look at her and see someone small, someone quiet, someone who wouldn't dare push back. They don't see the sharp awareness behind her eyes, the careful calculation in her movements, or the patience that allows her to watch, wait, and act at the perfect moment. To the casual observer, she blends in. She is polite when she needs to be, calm when confronted, even friendly when the situation calls for it. But that is all part of the camouflage, the armor that allows her to operate under everyone else's radar, to turn the assumptions made against her into advantages she can exploit. It isn't just her, it's the entire neighborhood. People who come in thinking they can manipulate, intimidate, or control often fail because they are reading the scene wrong. They think that order, quiet, and civility mean weakness. They assume that someone who doesn't react immediately is powerless. They look at the houses, the cars, and the people, and they decide that what they see is the whole story. But in reality, what they see is just the surface. Beneath it, there is strategy, history, and instinct. People here understand that strength doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes, strength is invisible until it is revealed in the perfect moment, when the consequences of misjudgment hit hardest. Misjudgment is common because humans are wired to make snap decisions based on appearances. Outsiders see calm faces and neat streets and assume they know the rules, assume they understand who is powerful and who is weak. But appearances don't account for past experience, for patience, or for the skill of someone who has lived long enough to recognize patterns and predict outcomes. They don't account for instincts sharpened by years of watching, listening, and learning who is trustworthy and who isn't. They don't see the careful networks of observation, the small signals people exchange, or the lessons quietly embedded into everyday interactions. And that blindness is often fatal to anyone trying to exploit the surface without understanding the reality beneath it. The more someone tries to impose their assumptions, the worse the consequences become. A single misjudged glance, a careless comment, an attempt to assert dominance. All of these are magnified by the false confidence that appearances inspire. The quiet girl notices immediately. She watches the way people move, the way they talk, the way they miscalculate. She sees who underestimates her, who thinks she is pliable, who assumes that calm equals weakness. And she waits. She lets the illusion persist, letting them build their overconfidence like bricks in a wall, until it is ready to crumble. It is the deception of appearances that allows her to turn the situation around, to take control without anyone realizing it until it is already happening. Outsiders think they are in control because they rely on what they can see. The visible, the surface-level cues, the shallow understanding of a neighborhood that has far more depth than they imagine. They don't see the quiet warnings, the hidden strength, the calculations running silently behind every expression, every gesture, every measured word. By the time they realize appearances were deceiving them, they are already caught in a world that they never understood and couldn't have predicted. The turning point where the tables are flipped didn't happen all at once. It started with small, almost invisible shifts that outsiders never noticed until it was too late. For weeks, maybe months, the wrong people had been testing her, assuming they were in control. They pushed boundaries, made careless remarks, spread rumors, and attempted intimidation, all under the comforting illusion that the quiet neighborhood offered them safety from consequences. They thought their actions were isolated incidents, small sparks in a calm place. They didn't realize those sparks were landing on dry kindling, and that she had been quietly building her own fire while they were busy underestimating her. Every misstep they made added to the tension, stacking quietly until the pressure was ready to explode. She didn't react immediately because reacting too soon would have ruined the effect. Timing was crucial. In her mind, every glance, every comment, every subtle sign of disrespect was recorded, cataloged, and analyzed. She knew that in order to flip the tables effectively, she had to wait for the right moment. The one moment where their confidence and assumptions would collide perfectly with her awareness and preparation. To the outsiders, it seemed like nothing was happening, that they had the upper hand. But behind her calm exterior, the entire situation had already shifted. The neighborhood itself played a role in the turning point. Every quiet street, every observant neighbor, every subtle signal from someone who knew the rules of the place acted like pieces on a chessboard. Outsiders didn't notice these pieces moving because they weren't paying attention. They were too busy basking in their false sense of control. The turning point relied not just on her awareness, but on the way the environment responded to the people who made the wrong choices. She knew the streets, the shortcuts, the hidden vantage points, and the rhythms of everyday life that could be used to her advantage. The calm neighborhood, which they assumed was powerless, became an ally without anyone realizing it. It started with the smallest things, a pause in conversation that made them question their own words, a carefully timed action that exposed their misjudgment, a look that hinted at consequences they couldn't yet see. Each act was subtle, almost invisible, but perfectly timed. She didn't need to shout, fight, or make a scene. All she needed was the patience to allow the situation to unfold naturally. The people who had underestimated her began to notice inconsistencies, small cracks in their assumptions, tiny signs that their control was slipping. They didn't understand what was happening at first, but as the tension grew, confusion replaced confidence. By the time the real turning point arrived, the outsiders were already deep in the trap they had created themselves. Their overconfidence had blinded them, their assumptions had misled them, and their miscalculations had paved the way for a reversal they never imagined. What had seemed like small, harmless acts now became the very triggers for their undoing. Each choice they made earlier, the ones they thought were inconsequential, was being used against them, exposed by her patience, awareness, and strategic thinking. The power balance had shifted without them even noticing, and they were now reacting to a situation that had been carefully orchestrated from the beginning. What made the turning point so striking was the subtlety of it. There was no dramatic confrontation, no loud argument, no sudden violence. Instead, it was a sequence of events that seemed natural, almost coincidental, but was entirely intentional. She had set the stage so well that the outsiders themselves walked into the consequences of their own decisions. It was like watching a slow-motion domino effect. Every misstep they had made tipped the next one, leading inevitably to the moment where the tables had fully turned. Their confidence, arrogance, and assumptions all became tools she used, turning what they thought were strengths into weaknesses. By this point, it was clear that the wrong girl in the wrong neighborhood had never actually been wrong. She had known the rules all along, understood the environment better than anyone, and had planned her moves with precision. The turning point was the culmination of all the quiet observation, all the patience, all the careful calculations. And it wasn't just a personal victory. It was a demonstration of how assumptions, underestimation, and poor choices can backfire in ways people never anticipate. The neighborhood, once assumed harmless and uneventful, had become a force that amplified her awareness and decisiveness, making the moment of reversal even more inevitable. Every subtle action, every hidden observation, every silent strategy led to the undeniable shift. It was the exact moment when confidence cracked, when assumptions faltered, when the people who thought they were in control realized they had never understood the rules of this place. And as that realization dawned, the turning point was complete, not with chaos or shouting, but with the quiet power of timing, preparation, and the underestimated skill of someone who had always been ready for this moment. The lesson, never underestimate someone or a place, is one that becomes painfully clear once the dust settles and the story has played out. It's easy for outsiders to walk through a neighborhood like this, passing by the picket fences, the trimmed hedges, and the quiet sidewalks, thinking that nothing could go wrong. They assume calm equals safety, silence equals weakness, and familiarity equals predictability. But that assumption is a trap, one that the wrong girl in the wrong neighborhood knew how to turn to her advantage. Every step she took, every glance she gave, every patient calculation she made was a reminder that appearances can be deceptive and that underestimating people or the spaces they inhabit can carry consequences far beyond what anyone expects. The lesson is rooted in experience, in observation, and in the awareness that every environment has rules that outsiders don't know. People who think they can waltz in and bend the rules to their will are always surprised when they find out how wrong they were. They see a quiet girl walking down the street and think she's harmless. They see a peaceful neighborhood and think it will protect them from accountability. But the moment someone miscalculates, the lesson becomes clear. Strength and strategy are often invisible, and the things you overlook can become your undoing. In this neighborhood, the lesson isn't taught with words. It's taught with consequences, carefully orchestrated and silently delivered to those who fail to pay attention. It's also a lesson in patience and timing. Underestimating someone often comes from impatience, from a desire to see immediate results or instant reactions. People assume that if a situation doesn't explode right away, it's harmless. But patience, as the wrong girl had learned, is a tool. By waiting, by observing, by allowing people to reveal themselves through their own choices, she was able to turn every misjudgment against them. The lesson isn't just that underestimation is dangerous. It's that patience magnifies the consequences of underestimation. The longer someone underestimates her or the neighborhood, the bigger the impact when reality finally catches up. Another part of the lesson is the danger of arrogance. People often underestimate others because they believe themselves to be cleverer, stronger, or smarter. They assume they understand the rules of the neighborhood, the dynamics of the people, and the character of the girl they're dealing with. That arrogance blinds them to the subtle signs, the quiet warnings, and the invisible strategies that have been in motion long before they even arrived. They rely on what they can see and dismiss what they cannot. In this neighborhood, that kind of arrogance is exactly what leads to mistakes. Every small miscalculation, every ignored signal, every failure to observe the hidden patterns contributes to the lesson being delivered with precision. The lesson is also about the value of observation and awareness. Those who fail to notice the small things, the glances, the pauses, the timing of interactions, are the ones who end up learning it the hard way. Outsiders often assume that because someone doesn't fight back immediately or make a scene, they are powerless. But awareness is a quiet power. Observing, listening, and understanding the dynamics around you creates an advantage far greater than brute force. In this story, the wrong girl's awareness allowed her to anticipate actions, predict reactions, and orchestrate the turning point in a way that seemed almost invisible, almost coincidental, to those who thought they had control. It's a lesson about respect, too. not just for people, but for the places they inhabit. Neighborhoods, streets, and communities are shaped by experience, shared understanding, and invisible rules. Those who ignore these things assume they can navigate the environment without learning its rhythm or understanding its history. The lesson is that places have memory, just like people do. The wrong neighborhood, the one that seems quiet and harmless, can hold knowledge, vigilance, and subtle forces that amplify the impact of misjudgment. To underestimate a person or a place is to ignore that memory, to ignore the quiet preparation and awareness that has been built over time. Finally, the lesson is universal. It extends beyond this street, this girl, this particular story. It is a warning to anyone who thinks they can act without fully understanding the situation, the people, or the context. Underestimation is often the first step toward disaster. Assumptions can be dangerous. Confidence without insight can lead to mistakes that are impossible to recover from. In the wrong hands, the lesson can be painful. In the right hands, it can be empowering, teaching the value of vigilance, strategy, and respect for what lies beneath the surface. Every element, the patience, the observation, the understanding of environment, and the anticipation of others' mistakes, comes together to deliver the ultimate message. The wrong people learned it the hard way, but the lesson itself is clear and timeless. Never underestimate someone, and never underestimate the power of a place that has been quietly observing and waiting for the right moment.